Hello, fellow artists. This is Linda Riddle, and it's a good time for art. Today we'll be doing printmaking using simple recycled materials we find around the house. But before we get started, you might be wondering, okay, what is printmaking? What's the difference between printmaking and painting? Let me show you in a really simple way. If you're painting, you have some sort of tool, maybe a brush or a roller, maybe your fingers, and you're making marks on a paper, and every mark is unique. When you're doing printmaking, you're taking one image from one place and you're transferring that image to another place. So my image is going to be my hand. I'm going to take some paint and put it all over my hand. You may have done this before. And then, this is my image. I'm going to take this and transfer it to this piece of paper. And that's a print. Now I'm going to take a break and wash my hand. There are many kinds of printmaking. The type we'll be doing today is called relief printing. You might recall that recently we did some relief sculpture where we had a flat background and items were projecting from the surface. When you do relief printmaking, you're printing the part of your printing plate that is sticking out. So suppose I'm going to use this toy block for printing with. I'll dip it in a little paint. And when I press it against this cardboard, the only parts that are going to print are the circles, because the circles are projecting out from the block. All of these parts that are recessed are not going to print. Now, relief printing can be a lot fancier than that. I have these beautiful wood blocks that I want to show you. Here's another one. And these are also made for relief printing. The part that prints is the part up here on the surface, and the recessed parts do not print. These were made especially for stamping dye onto fabric to make beautiful, intricate designs like this. And these artists in India are so impressive and so incredible to watch. I thought you might enjoy seeing some pictures of them at work. Woodblock printing was invented in China almost 2,000 years ago. But it was in India that textile printing with wood blocks became a true art form many centuries later. Colorful dyes were created with plants and minerals from the earth. Intricate designs were printed on fabric. Indian textiles became valued all over the world. Most fabrics are printed by machine today, but some artisans in India have continued to print textiles by hand. The process is very complicated. Wood blocks are cut and the surface is smoothed to be perfectly even. Then a design is drawn on paper and transferred to the block to be carved. It takes years of training to become skillful enough to carve the intricate designs. A different block is used for every color printed on the fabric. Printers use each block to print a different pattern and color onto the textile. For each impression, they dip the block into a tray of dye and press it onto the fabric. They carefully place the block while printing so the patterns will line up. The final result is a colorful and unique work of art. So now let's start our own relief printing. I've gathered together a lot of different things to print with, and I've prepared my table for printing. Let me show you what I mean. Printmaking works better if you have a little cushion underneath. So I've stacked a little bit of paper here. You could use newspapers, and I've just put an old towel on top so that when I press down with my print, it has a little bit of give, and that seems to make it work a lot better. I've also gotten lots of paper plates and put different colors of paint inside. And let me grab a piece of paper and we'll start printing. I'm going to start out with just a very, very simple shape, just with a circle, and dip this into the paint and press. I can, if I want to, make more than one print with each impression, and the quality of the paint changes with each stamping, and I think that's kind of interesting. I'm making kind of a simple pattern here by just overlapping these circles. And I think I'll overlap them this direction too. Already you can see that with one simple shape, you start getting all kinds of other shapes, and it immediately starts becoming more complicated. It'll become even more complicated as I stamp other shapes and colors on there. But before I do that, I want to show you a slightly different approach. You absolutely do not have to make a very regular pattern. You can simply stamp wherever you want to. It's still a pattern because you're repeating a shape over and over, but this is more of a random pattern, and the other one that I was doing was a lot more regular. Now on this random pattern, I think I'm going to start adding some other shapes and colors. So how about a square with a little circle in the middle of it? I can turn it different directions to make it more of a square shape or a diamond shape, depending upon which way it's angled. And I'm going to keep on adding to this one. Now you'll have a choice about the way you approach this. You can be very loose and have colors overlapping one another and blending, which is very beautiful and spontaneous looking. Or if you want something more precise, you can let colors dry in between the different stampings. So I'll do some both ways. This is my little sort of Lego block thing. That little cushion underneath makes a big difference. I can just sort of press down a little further. And you see they don't all come out exactly the same. It just depends on how much paint is on the printing block and how hard I press and the phase of the moon and who knows what else. Okay. So already I'm really kind of liking the way this one is turning out. I can come back to this more regular pattern, and I could get all spontaneous with shapes in different places on this one, or I can continue to be very, very evenly spaced. I think I'll try that. And I can overlap off to the side too. I don't have to keep every shape fully contained on the page. Let me see what happens if I take the end of this toothpaste box and press it into some paint. The white's always pretty dramatic on a darker color paper. I think that's fun. I think I'm going to leave that to dry and decide later if I should do anything more to it. Here's something that's already dry that I did earlier, so let me try a little printing on top of this. One thing I found that was so fun, this is just one of those balls that goes in the dryer, and it makes a really interesting print. I just press it into the paint and sort of roll it around a little bit. And then I do the very same thing on the paper. I have some paints that are a little bit shimmery. This is a metallic paint here. A lot of the other paints that I'm using are regular tempera paints. I'm going to try a little of the silver on here and see what happens. When it dries, it'll give this just a little bit of shimmer. As you can see, my hands are going to get a little bit painty. Doesn't bother me because it washes right off. But if it does bother you, some people don't like that feeling of paint on their hands. You can choose something to print with that has a really big handle. I could make some circles using this bottle. Let me try that on another page. My fingers aren't going to get anywhere near the paint, so that's an option if it bothers you to have paint on your hands. Other people might just love it and might decide to do some fingerprints as part of their pattern. So everybody can approach this in their own way. I am just going to show you a fraction of the prints that I made, because one thing I discovered is once you start printmaking, it's really hard to stop. This is a random or irregular pattern that I made by stamping simple shapes all over the place. Here's a more regular pattern with things all kind of lined up in a row. Here is another regular pattern, which is very simple, but things don't have to be complicated to be interesting to look at. One thing I love about this print are these wonderful textures, and I got those textures by printing with this block of styrofoam. These little squares were made by printing with this little wooden block. Here's a pattern that's somewhere in between regular and random. I had everything lined up in little rows, and when I finished doing that, I looked at it and I thought, this is kind of boring. I think I am going to stamp a few extra little circles in random places to make it a little more interesting to look at. I used metallic paint in these circles here, and I love the way that catches the light. And here is a little picture of a flower garden that I decided to do. And I'll show you some of the different tools I used to make my marks. For these petals here, I just used a paper roll, kind of squashed it and cut it on the diagonal and printed with that. These blue marks were made with a plastic fork. The little white dots were made by stamping with this dryer ball. The leaves were made with a sponge brush, but I didn't use it like a paintbrush. I used it to print with, so I stamped it in the paint and I stamped it onto the paper. Then for the stems, I took a piece of cardboard and bent it a little bit and then stamped that going different directions onto the paper. Because when I go outside and look at flowers growing from the ground, I don't see straight sticks coming up. I see lots of curvy lines and lots of motion, so I wanted to give that feeling of flow that you have when you look at a garden. Now, you certainly don't have to do a picture, but if you decide to do a picture with these printmaking supplies, just be aware of the results that you're going to get, and that these kinds of materials will give you something that's very loose and very spontaneous and kind of unpredictable. So as long as you can go with the flow on that and enjoy those special qualities that printmaking gives you, you're going to have a great time with it. If you have in your mind that you want to do something really precise and really realistic, you might be disappointed with the results that printmaking gives you. So maybe on another day, on another time, you might want to get out your colored pencils or pens and do a really precise, realistic drawing. But it's really important when you're doing art to take advantage of the materials that you have and enjoy the results that they can give you. Another thing I decided to do was to make some little mini prints, which were so much fun. You may not have a lot of space, you may not have a lot of paint. That doesn't mean you can't do printmaking. I had such a good time with these. They're just on 3x5 cards, and when I looked at them, I realized these would make really fun postcards. You could stick a stamp on one of these and write a note to a friend and send it off in the mail. Another thing I decided to do, I had some blank cards, and so I decided to print a pattern using my little square block and one color on this note card. And even though it's one single shape and one single color, it has so much variety because of the textures that this printmaking process creates. I think it's so beautiful. I had so much fun with printmaking that what I decided to do is in our next class, we can take printmaking even further and explore and see what other things we can do with it. So I look forward to doing that with you. Thank you so much for joining me today. Share your prints at #GoodTimeForArt. And join me next time. Remember, I release a new video every single Monday. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's all for today, but remember, it's always a good time for art.